Hi, I'm Dr. Christine Horner, and I am a former surgeon and now an expert in natural health and preventative health. I've written two award-winning books. The first is Waking the Warrior Goddess, Dr. Christine Horner's program to protect against and fight breast cancer. And my most recent book, which is Radiant Health, Ageless Beauty, a 30-day guide for extraordinary health, beauty, and longevity. I was first introduced to thermography back about like 16 years ago, I think. And I was just completely captivated by it because it was the first unique test that showed physiological processes before there were structural changes, and therefore a huge preventative tool. So about 6 years ago, I actually started working as an interpreter of thermographic images, as quote, a thermologist, for the Physician Insights, which is the interpretation company associated with MedHot. And then about 6 months ago, I actually decided that it was time for me to open my own thermography business. And that's what you see down at the bottom of your screen there, Dr. Christine Horner's Medical Thermography Group of Southern California. So clearly I have a passion for thermography, and I'm going to give you some insights about why I do, and particularly with a relationship to seeing inflammation. So Alex asked me to speak about inflammation, and inflammation is really an incredibly important factor. When it's chronic inflammation, it's something that we know helps to initiate and fuel all the different chronic diseases in the human body. And so it's very important for us to try to minimize it. So just to kind of start with the basics of inflammation, there's actually two major categories in inflammation. The first is acute inflammation, and then the second is chronic inflammation. Now, acute inflammation is actually a critically important normal physiological process in the human body. Without it, we couldn't survive. It comes from a Latin name in inflammare, which means to set on fire. And so when we have inflammation, it can kind of feel like there's a fire going on there. The typical symptoms that we see with acute inflammation are redness, heat, swelling, and pain. So just as an example, if you think about getting maybe a splinter, in your hand or finger, then the normal reaction that we see is the redness, heat, swelling, and pain. But what the inflammation is actually doing is it's helping to protect us from infection and from injury. It will initiate and promote kind of wound healing. It localizes and eliminates injurious agents. It clears dead tissue. It increases blood flow, and that's why we get the redness to the area. And then also it will cause the blood vessels to become more leaky, so that the cells, like from the immune system, will leak out into it, and also some fluid. So that's where the swelling comes from. It will signal the immune system, kind of bring it into that area, so it'll fight off any of the infections there, but it's also involved in the repair mechanisms and tissue repair. Now, chronic inflammation is a completely different situation. And chronic inflammation generally is not a good thing. And we usually see it as a systemic rather than a local acute inflammation. And chronic inflammation is really considered one of the strongest destructive forces to the human body. We know, as I previously said, that it's initiating and accelerating the progression of all the different chronic diseases. It also increases oxygen-free radicals. So it's kind of oxygen-free radicals increase inflammation, inflammation increases oxygen-free radicals. So you get the two of them kind of promoting each other, and both of those forces have been identified as the major things that are initiating and progressing chronic diseases, and also accelerating aging. Now, here's a short list of some of the chronic diseases that are involved with inflammation, and you'll recognize that most of these are things that are kind of the number one killers in our society, as far as cancers, diabetes, heart disease, Alzheimer's. I mean, you could just go on and on and on. Chronic inflammation is something that is really fueling all of those different diseases. Now, the symptoms of chronic inflammation are very different than acute. They tend to be a lot more vague. So people may complain about just kind of generalized fatigue and pain. And again, sometimes it's more localized, but sometimes it can just be systemic, like fibromyalgia, where it's, everywhere. Sinus congestion. Some people will run some mild fevers, mouth sores, and then any kind of skin eruptions or rashes are a sign of chronic inflammation. So what causes chronic inflammation? Well, as it turns out, the culprit is really our diet and lifestyle. And the American diet and lifestyle, which is notorious for being pretty bad, is something that really fuels inflammation. So what are we doing that's causing that? Well, inactivity or, have a very sedentary lifestyle, just that in of itself, not moving, causes inflammation in the body. Obesity, and the numbers are like ridiculous now. I think maybe 2/3 of people in the United States are obese. When we're obese, and particularly if you get belly fat, which is a little bit different, belly fat is metabolically active and it produces hormones and also inflammatory proteins. So kind of by definition, you are in a pro-inflammatory state if you're obese and you have belly fat. Smoking, of course, will increase inflammation. Excess alcohol, as we saw before. Emotional stress. So research shows that of all the things that affect our health, and these are like diet and smoking and genetics, our emotions actually have more of an effect on our health than anything else. So when we're under emotional stress, it just absolutely, pumps up all the oxygen-free radicals and inflammation in our body, kind of like more so than anything else does. Poor sleep, so staying up too late, not getting enough hours of sleep, and then poor diet. And specifically, the things that we find that really drive up inflammation are processed junk foods, red meat, processed meats, refined grains and sugars. Sugar just is poisonous to the body and creates a huge amount of inflammation. Refined omega-6 vegetable oils and dairy products. Now, the opposite of that is there's certain foods that actually help to tremendously decrease inflammation. These are the plants, based, and this is the reason that plant-based diets are considered so healthy for us. One of the many reasons is because they have a lot of anti-inflammatory, antioxidant, properties to them. And when we're measuring the amount of inflammatory, the ability for a food to be anti-inflammatory, we measure it as something called an IF rating, and that's called an inflammation factor rating. So the higher the number, the more powerful it is as an anti-inflammatory effect. And it may seem kind of counterintuitive, but what's interesting is that like hot peppers and Tabasco sauce and chili peppers, those are the #1 anti-inflammatory foods. They have the highest, amount of anti-inflammatory properties. So it may not be, something you can figure out on your own because you would think that those are things that actually increase inflammation, whereas it's the exact opposite of that. And then, a lot of spices like garlic and ginger and turmeric. I mean, these things have just tremendous, anti-inflammatory properties to them. Now, we can also categorize things kind of based on food groups. So there's these are considered the best anti-inflammatory spices. Again, red hot chili peppers are #1, cayenne pepper, ginger, turmeric, best anti-inflammatory vegetables. I actually have a handout that I attached to so that you can have a list of all these things. But if you go online, you'll find these, all over the place, where you can then choose like what are the particular foods that have the highest amount of antioxidants. And I'm trained in Ayurveda, but one of the ways that you then make your decision about the foods that you're going to consume is say, okay, let me create the best anti-inflammatory diet that I can. And you choose things from the top levels of, as far as the vegetables, the seeds, the fruits, and then you can create dishes, from that. So you have like an amazing meal that's made with these high anti-inflammatory foods. Now, there's also lifestyle choices that you can do that will decrease inflammation. With exercise, you actually have to be careful not to over-exercise. And, if you ran a marathon, most people are having terrible problems after that with inflammation in their body. So there's kind of the rule of thumb is that if you do 30 minutes of brisk walking a day, that's considered, one of the best things that you can do, and is extremely anti-inflammatory, along with stretching exercises and yoga, getting 30 to 60 minutes of sunshine from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. That has to do with, manufacturing vitamin D in our skin, because vitamin D has amazing health properties, including being very anti-inflammatory. Staying hydrated, drinking lots of purified water, optimizing your sleep. What the research shows, and what Ayurveda said from 5,000 years ago, is that going to bed by 10 o'clock and getting up by 6 o'clock are considered the optimal hours of sleep. And it all has to do with hormonal fluctuations. And this includes not just testosterone and progesterone and estrogen, but melatonin, our sleep hormone, insulin, which helps to facilitate getting glucose into the cells, our stress hormone, cortisol. All these things kind of interact, and they have peaks and valleys throughout the day and throughout the night. If you go to bed by 10 o'clock, those hormonal fluctuations are optimal. If you go to bed after 10 o'clock at night, they're not. And in fact, what research shows is that if you stay up to midnight on a regular basis, it causes such severe hormonal imbalances that it basically doubles your risk of heart disease, diabetes, obesity, and certain cancers, including breast, prostate, and colon cancer. So super important to get to bed by 10 o'clock. Then practicing an effective stress reducing technique. So we did discuss how stress is something that has actually more of an effect on our body than anything else. And so in order to have optimal health, it's important to do an effective stress reducing technique daily, like meditation. And then finally, spending good quality time with friends. So this is another emotional thing where research shows that of all the emotions that we feel, feeling loved and supported is the most powerful emotion for our health and our longevity. So surrounding yourself with people that are loving, supported, staying with them, spending time with them, and then avoiding people who are toxic, because that's actually the worst stress to the human body. Now, in Western medicine, the way that we measure inflammation is through blood tests. And there's a number of different blood tests that can give us an indication of inflammation in the body. But these three, the erythrocyte sedimentation rate, the C-reactive protein, and the plasma viscosity, are the three most common ones that we use to measure inflammation. Now, this is where thermography actually comes into play, where it's able to see inflammation in the body. And we're able to see changes, like physiological changes in the body, before we have structural changes. So in other words, sometimes we can pick up levels of inflammation in the body that may not even show up on those blood tests, because that requires kind of a structural change that's going on in the body. So this is a good example where this is actually a thermographer from, I think, Norway, maybe. And so he did this experiment on himself where he took an image of himself, and then he drank excessive amounts of alcohol, apparently all sorts of different kinds. And then he imaged himself the next day, and that's what his image looked like, on the right of your screen. So what we see in those patterns, you see the little kind of punctate areas of heat. And then also on the chest, we're seeing where we've got the vascular patterns here too. These are called mottling patterns, mottling. And mottling patterns are something that we see with thermography, and they're considered non-specific. And what I mean by that is that there's not just one thing that can cause them. If it's one thing, then it's specific, but there's many different things that can cause these modeling patterns. And then we have to be kind of investigators to figure out, well, what can be the source of those modeling patterns? So in this chart, we have a variety of different things that are known to cause modeling with thermography. So alcohol, as we just saw, smoking, chemotherapy, toxicities, allergies, stress, again, infections, inflammation, autoimmune diseases. So all of these things are causing inflammation in the body. And so it's we can understand why it's causing these, modeling patterns. Now, we can use thermography to assess the amount of inflammation that somebody has in their body. And we can look at various different areas and regions of the body. The more areas that are involved in these modeling patterns and inflammation, the more severe the inflammation is in the person. So in the head and neck area, when we see inflammation, it's going to be primarily in the sinus area. These are maxillary sinuses, and then it can drain down, around the mouth and then into the lymphatics, in the neck. Here's another example of someone who's got a lot of problems with allergies and sinus congestion. The nose should be really cold. And so when we see that it's hot, that's usually an indication that a person could have sinus and allergy problems. They might also have a skin condition that's overlying the nose, like rosacea. They could have skin cancer, overlying the nose too. So we have to, take a look at the client or the patient to determine those things. But again, having the nose hot, this is a sign of inflammation, and little bit different patterns that we saw than the other one in the previous slide. And these are modeling patterns that we see on the sides of the face. It's a little bit more uncommon to see that. So that's when I see modeling on the face, then we know that the level of inflammation is pretty darn high. Now, this is extreme inflammation here. So this is what it looks like on the normal palette that we use. And then this is the grayscale showing the modeling patterns fairly clearly there. We measure the modeling patterns as mild, moderate, or extensive. And so that gives us kind of a range of the degree of inflammation in the body. This is clearly kind of the most extreme that you can get as far as the extensive modeling patterns. Very rarely does it go to the extremities. So when we see modeling patterns in the extremities, then we know for sure that this is like this person has got just severe inflammation in their body. Now, this is a little bit more moderate amount of inflammation. You can see some of these modeling patterns in the back, but not as bad as what we saw before. In the abdomen, we'll see these patterns, which are vertical patterns of hyperthermia that can be associated with lymphatic congestion. And again, a sign of inflammation. Now, the good news is that when we do diet, lifestyle, and nutritional supplements, we can get these patterns of inflammation to change quite rapidly. So here's an example of a person who had these inflammatory patterns in the breast. This would put them at a higher risk for developing breast cancer in the future. And the whole idea of thermography and beauty of thermography is that we can use it as a preventative tool. So we can pick these things up. She doesn't have breast cancer, and we can say, all right, let's do the full court press as far as diet and lifestyle and nutritional supplements, and then rescan in about 3 months or so. And it's very common for us to have everything clear up and go away in a very short period of time. This serves as an incredible motivation factor for people too, because when they can see, all right, I'm doing the diet and lifestyle, it's hard for people to, to stick with that. But when they see that they have these changes like that, then it is a huge motivation factor for them to continue on their program. And thermography is this incredible tool, completely unique. No other tool gives us this information where we can monitor the inflammation and monitor the improvements of it. And if we are doing a program and they're not getting better than on thermography, then that would give an indication that we need to change, what we're doing to get, the results that we want to get. We can also look at the anywhere on the body, for inflammation in the extremities. So in the hands, this is kind of a normal hand. So we expect that the hand is going to get cooler and cooler as you go out to the tips of the fingers. A lot of people have some inflammation at the base of their thumb, either from just overuse of it, or they may have some early arthritis there. And then we'll get conditions where people have their whole hands are warm, and we call that a glove pattern. And that is commonly associated with having elevated glucose in the body. So we may pick up like pre-diabetics from seeing the heat in the hand. And then you see the fingernails have that red hot or white fingernails, then that might be an indication of high blood pressure there too. And all those things are, causing inflammation as well. So again, we're looking at various different areas of the body. We can measure the degree of inflammation. We can monitor the progress and improvement of inflammation too. Again, this is something something that we're able to reverse pretty simply with diet, lifestyle, and supplements. And since it's a major factor for all chronic diseases, to me, it's like a key focus in being able to decrease inflammation. And thermography is just a perfect tool to allow us to do that. So thank you so much. I think I'm going to be in the Q&A. So if you have any questions, I will be able to answer those for you soon.